Hey guys, my name is Necro, and it is tech time. In my last video, I went over a parts list on how to build a PC that would have performance in every title on the market right now at or exceeding console performance at a cost that's less than what most people spend on having both a computer and a console in the first place. Unfortunately, that price list has actually changed since then. The price of parts does fluctuate from time to time, but it's still easily doable, and even with the fluctuated price, it's still less than, so not at the $500 target that I wanted. A big part of that change is just the motherboard, but you can go on something like Newegg right now and find another motherboard that's comparable and still around the same price point. Like I found one from MSI that still fit the same form factor, still had all the same features, and put the price back around where we were looking. Still doesn't require any firmware updates, access to somebody with a Skylake CPU, anything like that that you would need if you wanted to go super cheap and get like a $40 motherboard like an H110, because doing that you would need a Skylake processor. And since this is geared towards people who don't necessarily know how to do this, we're sticking away from little tricks like that for right now. Recently, I ordered the parts to actually build that computer and run it through its paces. So today, we're gonna take a look at putting that computer together, talk about some points about it, specifically using a cheaper case and how that works and how you can avoid some of the common issues with that or work around them, and then see benchmarking, because that's what most people I think are really keen to see, exactly how this $500 PC performs. So let's get to it. Alright, so I hadn't intended to talk through this, but I got a little rambly and it went a little long, so I'm time-lapsing and going to voice over now. Just a reminder, two variations of this build, G4620 using the Pentium, and then upgrading it to the i5-7500. Anyone who's never built a computer before, just to walk you through what's going on right now, I'm putting in the CPU and the heatsink. CPU is really easy. You lift the latch, match it up, set the little white corner, match it up with the white corner on the motherboard, and put it in, close the latch, and then the heatsink attaches. The stock heatsinks come with thermal paste already applied. Line up the 4 pins with the 4 holes in the motherboard and push them in until they clip. If you need to take it off, you turn each of them a quarter turn counterclockwise, and there they go. Before you can drop the motherboard into the case, though, there's two things you want to do. Make sure the motherboard's not going to block access to anything else going in, like the power supply, and make sure the I/O shield is installed as well. In some cases, you're going to need to also put in the standoffs. This case came with the standoffs already screwed in, so that wasn't necessary. Then it's just a matter of putting in your hard drive, putting in your graphics card, wiring up anything like the front panel headers, which follow your motherboard manual to determine how those go in, and plugging in your power connectors. Things like USB headers, if it fits, it goes in. Same with the power connectors. If it fits, that's where it goes. They are designed so that they can't plug into a slot that's wrong. Make sure that it just looks the same. Most power supplies also have the cables that are labeled. Just to run you through some power connectors that you're always going to need: CPU connector, 12-volt rail, SATA connectors, and GPU cable if it's not getting power through the power supply, which is going to be pretty obvious because there will be a power socket on the card itself. Other than that, pretty much everything just gets powered through the 12-volt rail that's going into the motherboard already. Fans also are going to have their own headers that you plug into, either 3 or 4 pin. They will be labeled. The CPU is going to have its own socket, and then the case fans are going to have their own as well. Alright, so here we have Battlefield 1, one of the most CPU-intensive games on the market right now, especially in multiplayer with the 64-player maps, running at medium settings. No FPS counter on the top because I was a little stupid when I was starting. I wasn't paying attention to what I was actually doing. But just from appearance, you can see here, even with all the smoke, all the people, all the foliage, lighting effects, and everything going on, still completely smooth. Now that the FPS counter's on here, you can see solid 60 FPS. VSync is on because, again, I wasn't paying attention, but it's locked at 60 FPS. It does not dip below it. You can see a few points here where it goes down to 55, 57. Oh no, 5 to 3 frames dropped. Not that big a deal. Still significantly better than performance on the Xbox One and the PS4 with better visuals as well. So I decided, with how good it was running, let's see if that Pentium can handle ultra settings. And at first I was thinking it was going to do pretty good. Because, I mean, yeah, it was dipping more. It was in the 50s more often than not. But at first, just running through, it seemed to be doing just fine. When we got into combat, however, it did stay a little bit lower. You can see it hit 40 there, 45, low 50s, high 40s more often than not. And here, now that the smoke's on, you got to put the gas mask on. It stays lower, but it's still above 40. So considering this is a Pentium, and it's one of the most CPU-intensive games on a 64-player map, the fact that it's still above 40 frames per second is really impressive to me. So let's go into something single-player. So it's not having to account for all the extra players, it's just the performance of the game itself. This is on Ultra, right out the gate. And you can see here, when there's no combat going on, 100 frames thereabouts, sometimes more, sometimes less. When you get into combat, it does go down, but it's still above 60 FPS almost the entire time. I don't actually remember if it did drop below 60. I don't think it did. This is a new game, just came out last year. Absolutely gorgeous. Particle effects everywhere. Smoke, fog, heating, lighting, reflections. So many enemies to throw fire at you and for you to shoot back at, and it never dipped below 60, to my knowledge. It came close. It just did right there. It hit 64, I think, at the lowest. But really, really impressive. And I'm just astounded by how gorgeous this game looks, which, by the by, if anybody was thinking about 3D vision, this game doesn't natively support it, but it can be tweaked to do so, and it looked fucking amazing. So here, I had tested Metro Last Light Redux on medium, and it blew it out of the water. I didn't turn super sampling on because the whole point of this is a 1080p build, not 2, 3, 4, 5 times that. But everything else is on max. And you can see when there's no combat, 130, 150 frames. Sometimes it goes down to as slow as 120. In combat, oops, hitting my microphone, it still stays mostly the same. 120 frames per second plus on a game that is extremely well done. And I've got to give props to the developers for this. A lot of that is just how well optimized this game is, because I know a lot of games that look worse than this would have performed worse as well. Now, Fallout 4. I did not turn VSync off for this, and that was intentional, because the Gamebryo engine, which Bethesda's using for their games, physics is tied to frame rate. So I didn't want to risk any added errors or glitches by having the frames go above 60. You can see here, just running through, it doesn't dip. It stays pretty static. So I decided I was going to, first off, just so everyone knows, God mode is on because I'm not playing the game right now. So I went ahead and I tested different environments. First, let's see what the glowing sea looks like. It's, see all the fog, all the effects, all the particles floating around, the lightning, the storms, still staying at 60. So then, shortly here, we are going to transition into the city, into Boston proper. Downtown Boston is the most intensive part of this game, hands down, and Fallout 4 is known for being fairly poorly optimized as well. This is all stock, no mods, so it is running as Bethesda released it, with whatever updates they've released since then. Even in a firefight in Boston, it still stayed well above 30, which is what the consoles are playing this game at. You see it does dip here down to the low 40s. When we're wandering around the back alleys, though, we start having some issues. I don't know if this is because of the CPU or because we only have 8 gigs of memory and they're running only on a single DIMM. But while the frame rates still stay pretty decent, there is some stuttering. So I'm going to account that mostly to the fact that it's on a mechanical drive and only a single stick of memory. And then going through the water, transitioning in and out of the water and the different lighting effects there, still perfectly playable on ultra settings. So the last thing we're doing here is a synthetic benchmark using the Metro Last Light benchmarking tool. On run 3 of 3 here, so it's already been in use for quite some time. You can see it's doing pretty well, and in this case, everything's on max, including super sampling. So that's why it is struggling as much as it does, but this benchmark will make a lot of systems cry for mercy. You will notice, though, occasionally there will be some lighting glitches, some minor artifacting that occurs. But that's the point of a synthetic benchmark, is to torture the system and push it to its limits and beyond and see where it fails. And considering this is using a dual core and a Pentium at that, it's not even an i3, I would say it's holding up pretty damn well. And this runs until the firefight actually starts in this benchmark, just because it looks gorgeous. It's one of my favorite benchmarking tools out there. And just for the fact that it's not a lot of the gaming benchmarks that a lot of people use, like Unigine, test the graphics only. They're coded to focus entirely on the graphics, whereas this actually does rely on both the GPU and CPU. And you'll notice that when we test it with the i5-7500 after this, because we do put in the recommended upgrades that I mentioned in my first video, which is the i5 and the second 8GB stick, to put it up to a total of 16 and in dual channel, and you can see the improvements there. But even when the firefight starts, the flames, the bullets flying, everything, it's still smooth. It still stays at an average of 30 plus, which is what the consoles do. You can see minimum frame rates through all 3 runs. It's about 13, 14, with the lowest taking its average down to about 12, with the total play average being about 40 and the max being about 100. So here we are now with all the upgrades done. See, we're sitting here now. VSync's off because I know what I'm doing and I'm paying attention now. See, I'm smart. i5's in there, 16 gigs in dual channel. Otherwise, the exact same machine. So this takes it from a $500 build to a $650 build. All on ultra settings, well above 60, or at 60 or above the entire time. Same with Doom. FPS is a fair bit improved. Although above 60 FPS on a 60 Hz monitor, you're not actually going to notice that much of a difference, other than your dips are going to be less noticeable. But even with everything going on, does it go below 80? Yeah, it does for a brief moment, but for the most part, 80 plus the entire time. And here we have the more detailed benchmarking stuff open in Doom. You can see that occasionally the CPU is still a bottleneck right there. But for the most part, the CPU and GPU are keeping pace with each other. So I'd say this is a fairly even match, the 1063 gig and the i5-7500, to get pretty solid 1080p performance for really good budget. Even though the 4620 impressed me. Here, I noticed something strange though. Your FPS in Metro was lower, but it played smoother. Which FPS is an average over time, it's not a flat value, but I still found it interesting that the FPS was lower with this setup than it was with the Pentium and the 8 gigs of memory. But it was noticeably smoother to watch. Now here in Fallout, again, all ultra settings, in Boston, downtown, with fog, so one of the most demanding weather effects on as well, and I'm running around rapid firing a fat man. And it stays constant almost the entire time. Right there it drops down to, I think it was its lowest while playing at 244. And it looks absolutely amazing. So the 4620 held its own. The i5 and the extra stick of memory are, oh no, there was a lower point, it hit 40. The i5 and the 16 gigs of memory are better across the board. But the 4620 did just fine. I would have no problems gaming on that machine. Now, back to the Metro Last Light benchmark. Interesting thing to note here, your FPS is almost identical to previously. your average FPS is almost exactly the same, sitting at about 44 throughout the entire course of all 3 runs. However, both the minimum and the maximum increased. But the minimum did not increase by a whole great deal. The minimum went up from, I think the total average between all 3 runs last time was 12, whereas here it goes up to about 14, maybe 15, not that big of a difference. The big upgrade here was the maximum frames per second, which went from about 100 to about 150 with the i5 and the 16 gigs. And you'll see that here in a moment when we transition to the results. Yeah, here we go. You see here, max frame rate's 140, 141. And here, my favorite part of this, temperatures. After gaming for however long that was, a couple hours, and then putting it through a 30-minute torture test, maximum temperature on all 4 cores was only 64 degrees. For being on a stock cooler, that's really not bad. So, verdict? I'd say that $500 build with the Pentium G4620 and the 8 gigs of memory did just fine. And the either most demanding games or less optimized games, like Battlefield 1 being the most demanding on the CPU side and Fallout being one of the least optimized that we've tested, you do have to crank the settings down if you want to maintain a steady 60 FPS. But if you're just concerned with having smooth performance comparable to the consoles, then even on Ultra, that Pentium does just fine. If you wanted to take full advantage of the PC's capabilities, though, and full advantage of what PC gaming is with that 60 FPS and mods, then definitely going to that i5 is a big improvement. Even without worrying about anything else running in the background, we did notice in every game an improvement going to the i5 and the 16 gigs of memory. Metro Last Light, it was a little weird in that the FPS went down, but it still looked smooth, it still played smooth, it was still easier to control. So, if you have the extra money, I would recommend getting the i5 and that second stick of memory. If, however, all you have is 500, then you can still build yourself a really solid machine that I don't think you would have any issues gaming on, any complaints to worry about necessarily, and it would game on everything that's out right now and coming out for the next year or two without any foreseeable issues. In a couple years, you may have to cut the settings back a bit, maybe even down as far as low, but you would still be able to play every game out there for less than half of what a lot of people say a gaming computer cost minimum. You don't need to drop the $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 that a lot of people tout as minimum entry for a gaming PC. Now, I did, but that's because I'm a little obsessive about this sort of thing. And you can see a picture of my personal rig on my Instagram, which links in the description and on my channel page, if you're curious. As far as this build, as far as gaming on a budget, this does everything you need. Also, thing to note, that Windows that I had installed, Windows 10, you don't actually need a product key. When you install it, you can tell it, I don't have a product key, and it will still install the full version of Windows for you. The only restrictions are you cannot personalize it in any way. You can't do themes, backgrounds, screensavers, anything like that. And you will also have a watermark that pops up that can be disabled. Guides to do that you can find on YouTube and on tech forums like that to make it so that watermark doesn't pop up anymore. But you have a fully functional version of Windows for free. If you wanted to support the company that made the software that you're using, and you also wanted to be able to personalize it and you can do little things like that, themes and all that, it costs you $80. Why not? But it's not necessary. So as far as getting the computer capable to game, that's all you need. So $500, and you've got yourself a machine that will do all your normal use needs, your internet browsing, your Word documents, your photo editing, and gaming with everything you'd want to do. So there you have it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. And as always, suggestions are welcome. So if there's something in particular you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below, and I will catch you guys next time.